Well, hey everybody, was Brandon Perdue's disappearance an accident, or did this kid carefully orchestrate his disappearance, including conducting a practice run? A practice run that made sure things worked out like he intended. This video was an investigative precursor to a search done by our friends at Adventures with Purpose. Hello, everybody. I'm Mike King, and this is Profiling Evil. I'm going to be joined today by my co host, Taylor Nicholas of TGI Crime Day, and we're looking into a case out of Medford, Oregon. Now, listen, this case was recorded about 6 months ago. We've been holding it in the can until Adventures with Purpose releases their video on their findings. I'm sitting in Mexico right now. I've been speaking at an international Latin America conference for law enforcement. We're going to take a moment, though, and ask you to hit the like and subscribe button and ring the bell so that you get all of our notifications. And keep in mind, folks, again, most of this information was recorded 6 months ago. Now, Jared Lysick of Adventures with Purpose reached out to me and asked what we could do, and if we could do, a little bit of digging into this case to uncover any clues that we could find that helps them to search for Brandon Perdue. They just released their video of that search, and they've authorized us to share what we provided to them. So let's dig into this interesting missing person case from Oregon. Taylor, I just landed from France. I want you to tell everybody about this case because Jared Lysick's team is going to be hitting the ground tomorrow and beginning their search in Medford, Oregon.
Brandon Perdue sent out multiple texts on June 13, 2008 that left his friends and family both shocked and confused. Around 6:30 p.m. that night, he texted his girlfriend saying that he was considering harming himself. He also called his parents twice and told them the same thing, ending his conversation with a final goodbye. After examining these mysteries with you for so long, Mike, I have really learned that media coverage can only give us the very tip of the iceberg of information, and every single story is full of unknown twists and turns. Let's start with what we have been able to uncover about Brandon's possible destinations for that night. What can you tell us?
You know, like most of these kinds of cases, there are multiple interpretations of what's going on in a person's life. Often, these interpretations vary, yet they seem to stem from a single source. In this case, the sources are actually friends who saw him at a Dairy Queen restaurant just about 5 miles north of his home. There's also information from his mother and some really interesting information from his estranged girlfriend. Now, reports suggest that Brandon was texting his girlfriend at about 6:30 p.m. and that she had just broken up with him. There's a little bit of a question about the timing on that, and there's some mixed messaging going on here, but it appears that this is the straw that broke this kid's back, so to speak. Brandon texted or called his girlfriend and told her that he was going to kill himself. He then abruptly threw on a white t-shirt and blue jeans, or a blue hooded sweatshirt, according to reports, some sweatpants and flip-flops, and headed out the door. It was a last-minute thing. This is really important because you think about all the emotion that's going on. If the breakup did just happen, this kid's just reacting, and he's reacting emotionally. But what he did next may not be as valuable as solving this mystery as chatting a little bit about what he did the day before he disappeared. So, Taylor, tell me what you've uncovered regarding what may have been some pre-planning.
There was something really interesting that I saw as we were looking into this case, and there was a Reddit user that had posted something on a page about Brandon that said that one of Brandon's friends had a post on his MySpace page about Brandon visiting Lost Creek Lake the day before he disappeared. Was this a coincidence? Was it somewhere he just liked to go? Or do you think it's possible that maybe he was searching the area for the perfect place to disappear?
This could change the entire possibility that this kid killed himself because he couldn't deal with being jilted by his one-time girlfriend. This one really makes me wonder as we learn more about this case, Taylor. Jared is going to be talking with Brandon's former girlfriend on the day of the search. So we're going to learn more about that in those interviews. Now, I hope Jared and Doug explore the reason for these kids' breakup. I mean, why did it happen? Was Brandon threatening suicide before the breakup, and his former girlfriend just distanced herself from him and all of that stuff that was going on? There was a Reddit post included that said some things that I found interesting. There was an indication that Brandon may have wanted to travel to Holbrook, California to visit the grave of his grandfather. So we want to know a little more about what was the relationship there. I mean, was he really close to his grandfather? When did his grandfather die? Could this have been a triggering event? What was going on? Now, did he completely leave the area? And all of these local lakes that we're considering are nothing more than red herrings? I mean, this one's really interesting. But before I send you down an unnecessary rabbit hole, I don't think this kid made the trip to California. And I say that because in order to do so, he would have headed south from his home. We have forensic mobile phone location data that tells us that his phone, and that means most probably his vehicle and him, his body, himself, went northeast instead, not southern to California. In addition to this information, I reached out to the police chief, Chief Justin Ivins of the Medford Police Department. He connected me with Sergeant Derek Parks and Detective Patrick Dennis, the case agent. Now, Parks and Dennis provided me with some cell phone data, and as we explore this case, it's going to be really important to realize how valuable that information was. But remember, this was 2008, and the technology was a whole lot more clunky then than it is today. But cell phone data presents the clearest representation of what was happening. It's a lot more reliable than all the conjecture in this case. So we got to think about that forensic phone data. In this case, it shows that Brandon made it as far north as Eagle Point before turning east that last breadcrumb and leaving it a few hours later near Fish Lake. But this is one heck of a big breadcrumb because the cell tower that recorded his location is what we call an omnidirectional tower. Now, that means that the tower actually sends a signal outward in a 360-degree radius instead of these azimuths that we talk about that are pointing in specific directions and toward specific sectors. The result is that the phone's location is not going to be as accurate. But a larger generalized area can be shown by these old forensic reports, and they really tell us a lot. So adding to that challenge of terrain and the age of the technology, things get a little more difficult to precisely locate where that last device ping was. But with all of that in mind, the Adventures with Purpose team is going to need to look at several areas with, I think, a little broader stroke than we'd like to give them normally. Thus, we're going to have to really rely on behavior and I think a little bit of common sense as we put this together.
Using those cell phone pings can really help to narrow down a search area. And for a couple of weeks after Brandon disappeared, his family and friends conducted multiple searches, but unfortunately they didn't see any sign of him or his vehicle. An aircraft was eventually hired to do searches along Highway 140 up to the Klamath Basin. My understanding is that this aircraft wasn't just looking for a vehicle that was tucked away in the woods or hidden next to a road somewhere, but within a certain amount of time after Brandon's disappearance, they could have also been looking for signs like an oil slick that had floated to the top of a body of water, possibly from a vehicle being submerged.
Hey everybody, it's Mike from Profiling Evil. I've been studying criminal behavior for more than 40 years, and one of my favorite research tools is Truth Finder. It's online, and you're not going to believe the information stored there. So if you want to know more about that new neighbor, your babysitter, or your next online date, give Truth Finder a try. I'm including a link below with special discount pricing. You got to click the link to get it, and then enter EVIL10 at checkout. We're an affiliate, which means we get a small commission, enough to buy a small Diet Dr. Pepper, but you can cancel at any time. Thanks for listening today. Well, hey, folks, we're talking about the case of Brandon Perdue, a young man who disappeared out of Medford, Oregon. It's a case that Adventures with Purpose tackled, and you can find their video over on the Adventures with Purpose channel, and you'll get their findings. Now, we recorded this session about 6 months ago, so some of the information has been updated. Things like how many people they've recovered. But during that time, we've patiently waited as Jared and his team released their video. Now we're releasing ours. That area that we're talking about rests between Medford, Oregon, and Klamath Falls. This is where his cell phone pinged and where all of the forensic evidence that we've been able to examine comes from. Analyzing cell phone data is difficult at best, especially because it's several years old. And more importantly, because this is a mountainous, wooded area. Cell phone coverage just isn't that great there. Brandon's vehicle was really interesting to Taylor, and I'm going to have her explain why as we jump back into our discussion.
Is that he was driving a 1998 Honda Civic, which was actually the first car that I ever owned, and I can tell you that that car is not meant to be off the road at all. There were times that even driving it on the freeway, I remember being a little nervous because it was extremely shaky and not the sturdiest car I've ever driven. So the idea of him taking this car out into the woods and getting lost in a mountainous terrain, I just don't think that he could have made it very far in that type of vehicle. That definitely leads me to believe that it's possible that Brandon could have ended up in a body of water. So Mike, take us to the maps. Tell us about this area and what possibilities you think are at play here.
You know, I'm really enjoying watching you grow and develop in your investigative, intuitive behaviors, Taylor. By all reports, Brandon loved going to the lakes in the area and driving around in the mountains. But I agree with you. I mean, this thing about getting off road is really less likely in his vehicle. His car, as you said, is described as a red two-door 1998 Honda Civic. It has tinted windows, silver rims, and it rode low to the ground. Now, that immediately starts to exclude certain areas where the vehicle would high center or hit on rocks and other debris in the roadway, areas where it just couldn't navigate. But it doesn't take away from so many other possibilities. We have to remember that his girlfriend has mentioned over the years that every time she drives past Lost Creek Lake, it's the lake up to the north here as we look at it on a map, she thinks Brandon might be there. Now, it was a favorite lake of his. Well, in my discussions with police investigators, his girlfriend is not a suspect in his disappearance. So why she's coming up with that, I don't know, other than maybe that gut feeling of someone who was close to him. Really means it has to be considered. Now, there are not many people who probably knew Brandon better outside of his parents, maybe siblings, than his girlfriend. I often am saying that past behavior is predictive of future behavior. Remember that story that Brandon may have made a test run to Lost Creek Lake the day before he disappeared. So we got to ask the question, was he working out his plan, or is this just another red herring? Lost Creek Reservoir is certainly deep enough, and it doesn't get very low in the fall, so it could easily hide this kid's vehicle. Remember that so many of these vehicles are found in water less than 20 feet deep. In fact, in many cases, less than 10 feet deep. And yet they're hiding in plain sight. The forensic evidence on the phone makes this location less likely to me as we look at it. Those same forensics continue to push my thoughts back toward Fish Lake as the number one priority to check, and Lake of the Woods, but we can't forget this lake just north. This one is going to be really interesting, and we cannot discount it. I spoke with the detectives and I asked if they could chat with the county sheriff's deputies to see what access on Fish Lake was like in 2008. Most importantly, I wanted to know about that southwest dam that we're looking at, which now is surrounded by private lands. Then, of course, the boat ramp and a secondary ramp on the north and east ends of Fish Lake. These continue to intrigue me as I take the cellular forensics into consideration. Now, of course, there are other places we can't overlook, like the Lake of the Woods. But to recap, think about this for a minute, folks. Brandon made 2 phone calls at 7:01 p.m. from the Eagle Point area. Now we know that because his phone pinged off of the Eagle Gulch Tower. It came from a direction or an azimuth of 284 degrees, which puts him somewhere in this area. He then traveled east for about 8 minutes before he started a series of 18 different phone calls over a 35-minute period of time. Now, all of this was happening and pinging off of the Robinson Bluff Tower, and that one includes Fish Lake. So it seems more probable to me that this is the area most important for Jared Lysick and Doug Bishop to take the team out and search. But the science keeps pushing me back to Fish Lake, keeping in mind that there was only 8 minutes between the 2 phone calls and the 18 phone calls that were made. This drive time analysis that we're looking at right here suggests the area that he could have made in that period of time, traveling east where that Robinson Bluff Tower would pick up his phone signal. So there you go, Taylor. That's my thought.
Thank you for that information, Mike. It doesn't seem likely, given the limitations of getting off-road, especially knowing this type of vehicle, that Brandon's car could be pulled off to the side of the road and hidden somewhere in plain sight. Even if he were able to get a little ways off the beaten path, this area is very popular for hunting and hiking, and it just seems like by now someone would have stumbled upon this car that was kind of hidden in the brush. I also think it's important to note that there were several news bulletins put out asking the public's help for identifying Brandon or his vehicle. There have been no tips received to show the whereabouts of Brandon or even his vehicle. We've talked about this before in these more recent cases, how difficult it is to truly pick up your life and leave and start somewhere new. But I do think it's worth asking. Do you think there's a possibility that Brandon could have left and started a new life somewhere else without any outside help?
You know, Brandon has been gone for 14 years. While starting a new life is certainly a possibility, I don't think that he would have gone 14 years without reaching out to his family and friends. I mean, think of that statement I made earlier. Past behavior is indicative of future behavior. Think of how much time this kid spent texting others. He undoubtedly had other forms of social media, evidenced by his friends' comments about forums like MySpace, for instance. I just don't believe he'd turn off the faucet that quickly and that he wouldn't return to touching base with loved ones at some point. You know, law enforcement reached out nationwide to every police agency in the country, providing Brandon's missing person status. They gave information on his vehicle description, his license plate, the vehicle identification number. Bottom line here is if this car had been stopped or impounded at any time, the nationwide reporting system would have alerted them. So I just don't know about that.
This is where you, our viewers, come into play and help provide important information. If you know anything about Brandon or his whereabouts, please contact the Medford Police Department immediately.
Well, there you go, folks. This is everything that we know about Brandon Perdue, and we're hoping that if you know anything about this case, that you'll reach out to law enforcement immediately. I want to thank Taylor Nicholas of TGI Crime Day, and I'd encourage you to go down and get in the description below the links to her channel and subscribe. I really appreciate her insight, and frankly, I appreciate her enthusiasm. Now, make sure you're entering your comments on this case down below, and take a moment, folks, and read over the contributions by other viewers. Respond to them and have a dialogue back and forth. And as always, just keep it civil. I mean, that's really the cool thing about Profiling Evil and the people who subscribe to this channel. You have a mature way in which you talk about these criminal cases that we're looking at. And frankly, you have a mature way of handling things when you disagree with each other. So thanks a lot. And please know that I really enjoy reading your comments. And again, take a moment, hit that like and subscribe button, and ring the bell so that you get all of our videos here at Profiling Evil. And don't forget, check out our podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. Remember that you can find Profiling Evil on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And by all means, get over to our website at profilingevil.com and sign up for the free digital newsletter. It's called the B.O.L.O. B.O.L.O stands for Be on the Lookout. And listen, folks, I hope that you'll just take time to share our channel with anyone that you know. And keep in mind, if you register for the B.O.L.O, we're never going to share your information with anybody else. And I want to personally thank Jared Lysick and the entire Adventures with Purpose team for the chance that Profiling Evil has to collaborate with these guys on missing person cases. It has been incredibly meaningful for me to be able to apply this art and science of profiling and criminal investigative analysis to cases that they are tackling. Being able to add a geographic profiling and mapping perspective is a mix that is icing on the cake to me. So please share Profiling Evil with your friends and contacts, and thanks again for your support. We'll see you all soon at the next crime scene.